Greetings, my fellow YouTubers. This is a shot of whiskey, and this is part 3 of my 4-part series about the false labels of MGTOW. This one in particular is focusing on MGTOW being compared to MRAs. So let's go ahead and get this man-on-man battle underway.
Yeah, if he wants him, he's going to get him. Here they go. He's going to get him. There they go. This isn't college. Nope.
The first thing I'm going to point out is so obvious that I'm not even sure why I put it in this list, but maybe it's because it needs to be said. They are both male-oriented. You take a look at the acronyms, they both begin with the letter M. We all know what an M looks like. We all paid attention to Sesame Street for a while. And in both cases, the M stands for men. So, it's literally in the name, and it's not a deceit. Male-oriented. Okay? Let's move on. They both have members who are in the other group. There are MRAs who are MGTOW. There are MGTOW who are MRAs. Honestly, I see myself as being one of those examples. Although, to be fair to accuracy, in my case, the A in MRA is more of an advocate than an activist. Although, I have thought about looking for ways to become more of an activist, such as getting into politics, but I haven't really... Honestly, I haven't really had the time to put into something like that. Maybe at some point I will. For those that are not in both, those that are strictly MRAs, those that are strictly MGTOW, they both have members that respect the views of the other. What I mean by that is, there are MRAs who understand why MGTOW go their own way and respect that. There are MGTOW who understand why MRAs are fighting for men's rights and respect that. With that being said, there are also members in both who have no respect for the other. Oh, MGTOW, they're just pathetic losers who don't want to deal with reality and responsibility. That kind of thing, I will admit, is part of what I'm planning on doing for part 4 of this series, which, stay tuned for that. MGTOW have similar responses to MRAs. Oh, they're fighting a losing battle because they're so pussy-whipped and they're not able to grow on their own. And So yeah, you got members who respect the other. You got members who don't respect the other. That being said, many members in both started off along similar paths and had similar horror experiences. Usually, these individuals will be in a relationship and it will turn sour really bad. Case in point, men who get divorced. In fact, my father is a perfect example of this. He and my mom got married when they were both 19 years old. So if you're a Tom Likas listener, you know that's a terrible setup right then and there. They got separated before I turned 1. The divorce was finalized, if I remember the stories correctly, when I was about 2.5. And for a little over a decade, my father, because of how much he had to pay in child support, he wasn't able to get his own place until I was about 13 years old. So slightly over a decade of struggling because of all this responsibility he had to pump out. He had to live with his parents for a few years. He had to live with his older brother for a few years. He would live with girlfriends that he would have during these time periods, but he didn't have his own place until I was about 13. And that didn't last long because the woman that he ended up getting a place with was fucking cuckoo. But after that, he was able to get his own place. I mean, granted, it was a shitty little 1-bedroom apartment, but at least it was his and he could pay for it. So, all those years of suffering, and there are men who get it far worse than what my father had. So, unfortunately, my father's not an MRA or a MGTOW. He's still so fond of his pussy plantation that he does not want to leave. But, in his defense, I think he has found a woman worth keeping. So hopefully he doesn't fuck it up, and especially hopefully she doesn't fuck it up. So I do wish them the best of luck. And not just because he's my father, but because he's a fellow man. This one may be the one that I would say is the most controversial of my similarities that I wanted to bring up. They both have views on women's rights that state that some of those rights are bad for men. This kind of ties into where the differences come into play. So I'm going to try to be vague with this, but they both seem to agree that stuff like no fault divorce, false rape accusations, stuff like that are not good for men. They're good for women, usually, but they're usually bad for men. It's so easy for men to get financially screwed over with false rape accusations. It's easy for men to go to jail. So they both agree with those stances. It's just a matter of how they both respond. And with that, we're going to tie into how they're different. MRAs prefer to fight it legally, which I guess this ties into the other thing that they have in difference. MRAs are much more politically oriented. They're much more legal oriented. They're trying to actually change things because of how they view these particular women's rights and how they affect men. Whereas MGTOW, for the most part, the response is just don't be with women. Some will even go so far with their monkdom to where they'll try to avoid women as much as possible. Won't interact with them at work, won't talk to them out in public or whatnot, except for in cases where you kind of have to, like if you're at a grocery store and the clerk is just so happens to be a female. But other than stuff like that, they usually try to avoid women as much as possible. They understand that the laws are going to be very difficult to change, and honestly, like if you're somebody who listens to Turd Flinging Monkey, you'll know that there's a lot of situations to where it seems like you're just basically beating yourself up for the sake of beating yourself up. It's not going to get anywhere. And in some cases, and in some places, I think it's a fair assessment to make. Maybe that's just my MGTOW speaking, but so yeah, one's political, one isn't, and how they respond to the women's rights aspects relates to that. So that's it for now. I'm going to go ahead and cut things off. And what sort of ending clip should I have for you guys this time? Let me think.
It's 2018 and POGs are back.
Yeah, that'll do.